I've never been one to have a bad memory. Quite the opposite. I've always had an eye for details, especially for things that marked my childhood. One of those memories was of a small town my parents used to take me to on weekends. It wasn't anything touristy or special, just a quiet place with a large square, an ice cream shop with colorful tables on the sidewalk, and a toy store where I would always get something small. I even remember the smell of the wooden shelves in that store, and the soft music playing in the background. I hadn't been there in years, but one day on a work trip, I decided to take a detour to revisit the town. I was absolutely sure it was only about 40 minutes off my route. The strange part started even before I arrived. I took the road I remembered and followed my instincts since the GPS wasn't showing anything along that stretch. I thought it was just because it was a less traveled path, no marked points of interest. After about an hour of driving, I started to wonder if I had missed a turn. There was nothing around but empty roads and a few dry trees. I remembered a large sign at the town's entrance, but I didn't see anything like it. Still, I kept going, confident I would soon find something familiar. That's when I decided to text an old childhood friend, someone who used to go there with me. His reply chilled me. What town? That place never existed. I was stunned for a moment. What do you mean it never existed? I spent summers there, played soccer in the square, ate strawberry ice cream on the sidewalk. How could he say it never happened? I refused to believe it. I looked at the map again, trying to locate that place. The town I knew wasn't anywhere. No markings, no name, nothing. I kept staring at my phone's screen, as if it would somehow provide an answer, but all it showed was confusion. I began to feel like I was losing my mind, and my heart started to race. I decided not to turn back. If the town didn't exist anymore, so be it. I'd go as far as I could remember. The road grew more isolated, and the silence in the car was unsettling. The trees around me grew thicker and darker, and I couldn't see any houses. I swore that town was somewhere out there, and then in the distance I saw something. A sign, old but still legible. It simply read, "Welcome to Santa Ema." My heart skipped a beat. I sped up without thinking, almost losing control of my breath. Finally I saw it, the town with the square, the ice cream shop, and the toy store just as I remembered it, but with something strange. It was as if time had stopped there. I parked near the square, which was completely empty. That struck me as odd, like something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I looked around, and even though everything was familiar, there was this sense of distortion. The ice cream shop was there, but the tables were covered with a layer of dust. The toy store's doors were shut, yet the windows still displayed the same toys I'd seen as a child. The weirdest thing was that, even though I was there, I couldn't see a single person. Not one. The whole town felt asleep, as if everyone had suddenly disappeared. I got out of the car and slowly walked through the square, trying not to overthink it. The wind was weak, but I could still hear a faint sound in the distance. It wasn't music, but something that made my anxiety grow. That's when I looked towards the town entrance and saw a figure standing there. It was a man, his back to me, wearing an old, faded straw hat. He seemed to be staring into the void. What struck me was that, as I got closer, he didn't seem to notice me. I tried calling out to him, but my voice sounded muffled, like it was being swallowed by the air. The man didn't turn, but suddenly, his posture made my skin crawl. He was standing in a completely uncomfortable way, as if waiting for something, or someone. I stood there watching him, and the feeling of being watched overwhelmed me. I began walking faster, not knowing why, until he slowly turned his head to look at me. His gaze pierced through me. It wasn't just a look, it was as if he was examining me, as if he knew exactly who I was and why I was there. The sensation was so intense that I froze for a moment, not knowing how to react. He didn't smile, didn't move, but his presence was undeniable, and something inside me told me he wasn't just some random stranger. The tension in the air seemed to grow, as if something was about to happen, but at the same time, I couldn't move. I felt completely exposed. The silence stretched on, and the wind seemed to stop completely. Then, out of nowhere, the man turned and started walking slowly in the opposite direction, disappearing into the shadows of the trees surrounding the square. I wanted to follow, to ask him what was going on, but I couldn't. Something inside me told me it was better not to know. With my heart racing, I finally managed to move. I walked toward the toy store, hoping to find some clue or answer. The door was ajar, which felt even stranger, as if I was being watched the whole time. I stepped inside, but there was no one there. Everything was in place, as if time had frozen. The shelves were still full of toys, and the boxes looked untouched. I went to the shelf where I used to grab action figures, and to my surprise, one of them was out of place, turned away, as if someone had moved it recently. I picked up the figure, and the feeling of being watched intensified. I could sense that there was more to this town than just my memories. Something was wrong, and I couldn't explain what it was, but I couldn't leave. That's when the clock on the wall made a strange ticking sound. I looked at it, and the time was frozen, 3:27. I stood there watching it, feeling a tightness in my chest. I decided I had to leave, but the door wouldn't open. I kept trying, but nothing worked. I looked around, and the feeling of being trapped in the town began to consume me. It was as if time itself was holding me there. I started banging on the door, desperate, until, with a loud crash, it opened by itself. I rushed outside, and when I left the store, I noticed that everything was different. The square was empty again like before, but now the sky was dark and the lights in the houses, which I hadn't seen before, were on, but no one was there. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't explain what it was. I couldn't stay there any longer. I ran back to the car as fast as I could, not looking back. When I started the engine, everything felt even more out of place. The town seemed to distort around me, the streets stretching in strange ways, as if I were being pulled into something invisible. The feeling of being watched never left. I drove like a maniac, without stopping, until finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I managed to leave the town. When I looked in the rearview mirror, it was gone. There was no sign of Santa Ema anymore, not even on the map. I checked my phone, and once again the town's name didn't show up anywhere. I tried calling my friend, but the phone wasn't working. He wouldn't believe what happened, and honestly, I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. The town vanished, and I was left without answers. To this day, I've never been able to understand what happened that day. Santa Ema never appeared in my path again, and although my memory remains intact, I know that town, that reality, disappeared as if it never existed.